When I was a little boy, 2 or 3 years ago, I remember that I lived in a world of enchantment and fascination, particularly in grade school. And one of the things that I enjoyed most about attending grade school in the little school where we lived was that our teachers were always careful to decorate the walls and the bulletin boards with ornaments and pictures that were relevant to whatever season we were going through during the school year. You know, at Easter time, they would have cutouts of Easter bunnies and eggs and that sort of thing. And during Thanksgiving in November, there'd be turkeys and Indians and pilgrims. And at Christmas, all kinds of Christmas decorations. But my favorite time in the grade school decor was during the month of February, because that was the month not only of Valentine's Day and of my birthday, but it was the time that we honored two of the great presidents of American history, Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. And I remember as a small boy being mesmerized by the legends that were told about these great men. And I wondered how it was possible that George Washington could have enough strength to take a silver dollar and throw it all the way across the Potomac River. And since I've grown up and become an adult, I don't believe that anymore, nor do I really believe to this day that he ever stood up in the front of a boat in the dead of winter, being the only general in history to stand in the front of a rowboat with his hand in his coat while he was getting his portrait painted in the middle of a war. But the story, of course, that we heard most often when I was a youngster about George Washington was a story with a moral. And you've all heard that story. The allegation goes that when he was a boy, he chopped down a cherry tree with his little hatchet, and when his father came home and saw his prized cherry tree cut down and destroyed, he asked the question, "Who cut down this cherry tree?" And George Washington stepped forward and said, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. I cut down the cherry tree." Do you remember that anecdote? Every American learns that story. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I call that a legend. Or for whatever moral value it has to us, at the very heart of that story is a fundamental distortion of truth. There is something false about that anecdote. And if you listen carefully to the words of George Washington, I think you will perceive immediately what the error is. Little George Washington said, "I cannot tell a lie." Beloved, there were lots of things that George Washington couldn't do. But one of those things that he couldn't do was not tell a lie. George Washington was a fallen human being. And one thing that every fallen human being is eminently capable of doing is telling a lie. The Scriptures tell us, in fact, that all men are liars. It's not the same thing as saying that all men lie every time they open their mouths. But lying is one of those shortcomings, one of those sins that every one of us has committed during our lifetime. I mean, has there ever been a time that you can recall that you told a lie? And if you answer that question by saying no, then let me suggest that you've just done your first one. No, at least your second one. Because we have all lied at some point and another. Now, as I grew up and didn't think a whole lot more about Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, was introduced to the magic realm of television, and I began to see all of the mystery dramas that were set forth in TV, and saw Perry Mason and other similar dramas like that. We saw a familiar motif of crime and punishment. where the television camera would take us into the courtroom, if not to Judge Wapner, to somebody else. And as the witnesses were sworn in the witness box for their testimony, the bailiff or whoever it is in the courtroom would step forward and he would hold out a Bible. And he would ask the witness to put his hand upon the Bible, his left hand on the Bible, and raise his right hand. And you know how the words go. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help me God. And the person would say, I do. Now, from a sociological perspective, maybe a Martian coming to our planet and looking at the customs of our culture might think that this is a strange procedure indeed. But why do we find it necessary to begin courtroom proceedings where the witnesses take a solemn vow, a sacred oath, to tell the truth? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? That in court trials, it's the truth that people are seeking to discern. It is the truth that matters the most in a court situation. And the reason why we circumspect or ascribe the drama of the proceedings of the courtroom is that we want to do everything humanly possible to ensure that the testimony of the witnesses is true. And so we invoke the sanctity of the oath. We ask a person, ladies and gentlemen, to make a promise before God, the breaking of which promise we understand is punishable by law in the event of perjury. Have you ever stopped to wonder how important promises are to your life? So much of our human relationships depend on trust. And when I get to know you as a friend, or if I want to marry a woman and take her as my wife and she takes me as my husband, and we commit ourselves to each other, we are entering into a personal relationship where trust is everything. And nothing breaks trust faster than when we play loose with the truth. And everybody in this room, everyone who is hearing my voice right now, knows what it means to have been lied to. Now the question is there anyone who cannot tell a lie? The very foundation of the Christian faith is based on truth, on promises, and on vows that are certified by one who cannot tell a lie. Now, I've often said that if I were cast into prison and was only allowed to have one book at my disposal while I was incarcerated, the book that I would obviously request would be the Bible. I could spend the rest of my life in solitary confinement studying with all of my might and all of my mind that particular book, and I wouldn't begin to exhaust the depths and the riches that are in that. But if my request were made even more narrow and I were told that I could not have the whole Bible but only one book of the Bible, I've always said that the one book of the Bible I'd want would be the book of Hebrews, because in a sense it's a synopsis of the whole Bible. All of the Old Testament message is contained in summary in the book of Hebrews, plus its New Testament fulfillment of it. Some people who know me and know my teaching might might be surprised by that. They say, Sproul, you're always speaking out of the book of Romans. Wouldn't you want the book of Romans in the jail with you? And I said, no, I already know the book of Romans. It's in my head. You know, I need to have the text of Hebrews in front of me. But if my options were even more narrowly restricted, and I could only have one chapter of the Bible as I languished in prison, that chapter would be the 15th chapter of the book of Genesis. Now, when I've said that in the past, people have looked at me somewhat askance and say, what in the world is so great about the 15th chapter of Genesis that you would want that if that were the only chapter that you could have? Well, to answer that question, I'd like to direct your attention to a brief summary of Genesis 15. And let me begin by reading the opening portion of it. Genesis 15 begins with these words, "After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, 'Do not fear, Abram. I am a shield to you, and your reward shall be very great.'" Now, before I press beyond that, let's just do a moment's worth of recapitulation. You remember that Abraham, as a historical person, is introduced by way of his ancestors and so on at the end of the 11th chapter of the book of Genesis. And then chapter 12 of Genesis records for us the circumstances of Abraham's call, where God came to Abram in a pagan nation in Mesopotamia, in Ur of the Chaldees, when Abraham was already an old man. And God spoke to him and uttered a command from heaven saying, "Abraham, get up and go forth from your country, from your relatives, from your father's house, and go to a land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you I will curse. And in you, Abraham, all of the families of the earth shall be blessed." But first, Abraham, get up and get out of here. Do you know how frightening it would have been for somebody frail in age to leave at a moment's notice the environment that was completely familiar to him? Leave your family, leave your friends, leave your doctor, leave your dentist, leave your religious chiefs or whatever. Get out of here and go to a land that I will show you. And the land that God was asking him to visit was 1,000 miles away. God didn't give him an airplane ticket so that in just a few hours he would arrive at his destination. This is in the ancient world, where journey even of young and strong people was a perilous matter. God said, "You do that, Abraham, and I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you, and I will make sure that everyone who blesses you, I will bless them, and anyone that curses you, I will curse them. And in you, Abraham, will all of the nations of the world be blessed." Centuries and centuries ago, this message was given to a semi-nomadic pagan. And if it hadn't taken place, we wouldn't be standing here today in the 20th century ruminating about it. And the scriptures tell us that Abraham did exactly as he was commanded. And he got up and he left. And he journeyed to the land of Canaan. And after some adventures and misadventures along the way, then God came to him and said, "Abram, don't be afraid. I am a shield to you. And I am your reward. And your reward shall be great. And if ever Abraham were a bit cynical in his old age, he was at this point. For he responded to God by saying, "Oh, Lord God, what will you give me since I am childless, and my heir, the heir of my house, is Eliezer of Damascus?" Now, where's the cynicism implied in this question? It's like the old man says, "Look, God, I have journeyed. I did everything that you said. You promised that I was going to be the father of a great nation, that I was going to be a blessing to everybody, and in all the nations of the world were going to be blessed. And now you come to me and you say to me that you are going to give me a great reward." What great reward? Well, let's pause for a second. If we reconstruct the life of Abram and his circumstances, I don't think it would be much of an exaggeration to say that Abraham was one of the wealthiest men of the ancient world. Scholars have looked at the numerous examples of his private wealth in terms of his herds, his camels, and all of the rest, and they say that this indicates extraordinary wealth of somebody at that time and at that place in antiquity. And it's like this question: what do you give the man who has everything? And Abraham's asking, "You're going to give me a reward? It's a little late, God. What are you going to give me that I don't already have?" Or to say it another way, as some people say as they get older in this world today, what do I have to look forward to? Because no matter what you give me, God, the greatest ache and pain in my soul is that with all the material goods your providence has bestowed upon me, I have no children. My wife is barren. We're childless. I can't take it with me, and I can't leave it to my family. My heir is Eliezer of Damascus, a servant who lives in my house. So what reward are you going to give me? Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "This man shall not be your heir, but one who shall come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir." Abraham, you have it wrong. Your inheritance is not going to your hired hands. Your inheritance, Abraham, is going to your son, somebody who's going to come forth from your own body, flesh of your flesh, bone of your bone, blood of your blood. Then we read that God took him outside. And he said, "Abraham, look toward the heavens. Count the stars, if you are able to count them." Have you ever been outside in the dark summer night that was clear, not where it was hazy and smoggy? Or if you've ever been to Palestine, one of the most striking dimensions of the geography and of the situation there in Palestine is the clarity of the atmosphere. And on a night, which is almost always a clear night in the desert, in Palestine, you look up and really you see a star-spangled heaven. The Milky Way, if you can see the Milky Way from there, I don't know, but it would look like almost a solid sheet of white. Myriads upon myriads of stars are visible to the naked eye. And God takes Abraham outside and he says, "Look up there." He said, "Count them." 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Count them if you're able. Abraham could have stood outside of his tent and counted without counting the same star twice to this day and not have been able to number the stars of the sky. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. Abraham, as many as there are stars in that sky, so shall your descendants be. You're not just going to have one child to live after you. I said I was going to make you the father of a great nation. And your descendants will be as plenteous as the stars in the sky. Verse 6 is one of the reasons why I'd like to have Genesis chapter 15 in my prison cell. Because verse 6 makes this declaration. Then he believed in the Lord, and he, that is God, reckoned it to him as righteousness. Here is the gospel, ladies and gentlemen. Here in the 15th chapter of Genesis is the most succinct capsule summation of the doctrine of justification by faith alone. Abraham believed God, and there's no merit in that. Abraham should believe God because God is eminently believable. Abraham should trust God because God is altogether trustworthy. But Abraham believed God, and God counted him. He reckoned him as righteous. Not on the basis of any works that Abraham had performed, but on the basis of his faith and of his faith alone in the promise of God. Abraham believed God. And I think it's important that we understand that what it was that pleased God was not that Abraham believed in God. James tells us that, that the demons believe that there is a God. And they tremble. They at least have the sense to be afraid of God. But if you're sure that there's a God, and if you're scared of God, all that does is qualify you to be a demon. But they don't trust God. They don't believe God. Abraham said, I will put my life on the line by trusting you. I believe you. Do you see why it is that the Scriptures go back to this account and tell us later on that Abraham is the father of the faithful? That he is the supreme example in the Scriptures of faith in a human being. By faith, Abraham trusted the promise of God. And then God said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess it. Now, if the story ended there, maybe we would have legends about the great faithfulness of Abraham, like the great truth-telling of George Washington. As if Abraham was such a man of faith that he never, ever, ever in his life thereafter had the slightest bit of doubt or struggle or lack of confidence. But that would be a myth, wouldn't it? That wouldn't be authentic faith. That would be the faith of legend. And verse 8 continues the narrative and disposes any idea of a mythical faith. And one of the things I love about the Old Testament is that when the Old Testament paints the portraits of biblical heroes, it does it with the warts and all. I don't think there's ever been a history of a nation where the heroes of that nation were shown as nakedly as the history of the Jewish heroes are portrayed. Their sins are as great as their most heroic exploits. And they are set in the Chronicles of Israel for anyone to read. Abraham says to God, "Oh, Lord God, how may I know that I shall possess it?" Huh? He just got done saying, "I believe." And it's like in the New Testament, "I believe, Lord, help thou my unbelief." Now it seems that Abraham's belief is more hope. It's more wishful thinking than it is confidence to live by. Doesn't it? He said, "Lord, it's like, I believe you, I think. But it's awfully hard for me to believe that I'm going to be the father of a great nation, and it's a little tough for me to believe that my descendants are going to be more numerous than the stars in the sky and the granules of sand along the sea, because I'm an old man, and have you seen my wife? My wife has no hope of conceiving a baby. So, Lord, how can I know it? Not just hope it. Not just pray for it and hang on by my fingernails. How can I know for sure?" Do you ever feel like that? Your Christian life is only as strong as your faith. And the profession of faith is not the same thing as actual faith. Faith means you live by trusting what God says. And that's not always easy. Particularly when nobody else around you believes it. And we tend to have the intensity and the power and the strength of our faith either made more secure or less secure by the confidence or skepticism of those around us. Fear is contagious. Doubt is contagious. And faith is contagious. And Abraham says, "God, I want to believe this. How can I know for sure?" Now, as I said, this is one of the warts of Abraham, because if the God Almighty came to you and said, "Look, this is what's going to happen," you have to be stupid to say, "Prove it." If you know that that's God, and God says this is going to take place, who's going to doubt it? Abraham struggled, He said, "I need a little more. How can I know for sure?" I'll tell you, if you knew for sure that every promise that you have read or heard that comes from the mouth of God is absolutely true, your life would change so recklessly and so dramatically, nobody would recognize you starting tomorrow. Nobody would recognize me if I fully believed every word that proceeded out of the mouth of God. But you see, with our faith, there's always a mixture of unbelief, of insecurity. And Abraham said it before God, "How can I know?" And it's because of God's answer to that question that I want this book with me in jail. Not that I'm expecting to go to jail. I keep talking like this, I may end up in this, okay, let's see how you do in solitary confinement in prison. I don't ever want to have to prove that experience. I'm not asking for the opportunity. I'm not volunteering for that episode to take place. But again, if I'm there, the reason I use the prison image is that I would think that in solitary confinement, if I were experiencing loneliness and the sense of having been abandoned, that I would feel a sense of not only helplessness, but as every prisoner has to fight, a sense of hopelessness. Solzhenitsyn made the comment that he wasn't able really to resist the torment of the gulag until he abandoned all hope of surviving. As long as he had hope of surviving, he was at the mercy of his captives. But when he abandoned hope of surviving and said, the one thing they can't take from me is my soul, and he was able to say, whether I live or whether I die, if I never walk out of here, if I never taste freedom again, I have a relationship with God that no mortal can steal from me. Then he was able to stand. So here it comes. The thing I want in prison. This is incredible. This is one of the most exciting passages in all the Bible. And I know that as soon as you hear it, you're going to be breaking out in hives. You're going to have goosebumps up and down your spine. You're going to be so excited. You'll throw your hat in the air. Listen to what he says. God said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer and a 3-year-old female goat and a 3-year-old ram and a turtle dove and a young pigeon. Isn't that incredible? Huh? What is this? The farmer in the dell? Hi-oh, the dairy-o. They give me the heifers and the turtle doves and all of this stuff. He said, I want a heifer. Not only does it have to be a heifer, but it has to be 3 years old. I want a 3-year-old heifer, 3-year-old female goat, not a male goat, female goat, and a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, a young pigeon. God, I didn't want to start a farm or a menagerie. I just want to know, how can I know for sure that I'm going to have a son? But if that's what you want me to do, I'll go collect these animals. So we read that Abraham brought all of these animals to God, and he cut them in two. And he laid each half opposite the other, but he didn't cut the birds. And then the birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Abram drove them away. Now, when we read this as sophisticated 20th century people, we say, what kind of primitive, bizarre, obscene type of animistic religion is recorded in this text? It sounds like savagery, where these animals are brought forth, and then Abraham hacks them to pieces, cutting them asunder, tearing them in half, and then this macabre scene of setting the pieces opposite each other, with sort of a pathway in between, one half of the he-goat and the other half of the he-goat, one half of the 3-year-old heifer and the other half of the 3-year-old heifer. Doesn't that sound almost like witches and goblins mixing up batch brains and lizard guts and so on to cast some kind of magical potion? Well, that's not what's going on. Something far more significant than that. The birds of prey were attracted to this holy liturgy, to disturb it, to defile it, to destroy it. And Abraham, all he was able to do was to shoo away the vultures and the buzzards that were coming. Then verse 12 said, when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. And behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. They don't give this narration in terms of modern clinical psychology, but is there anybody who's ever experienced what physicians call an acute anxiety attack? Where this sense of terror descends upon you, making you sick in the pit of your stomach, afraid to take another step. What the saints called the experience of the dark night of the soul. So what the Scriptures are describing here in Abraham's life is as the sun goes down and he's left with this scene of carnage around him, he is suddenly overcome and virtually vanquished by terror that descends upon him in his sleep. And while he was asleep, in this terror, God spoke to him, saying, Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But then will I also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. And as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, and you shall be buried at a good old age. And then in the 4th generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. Now I have saved the best for last. If I ever am in prison, remember the one book is the Bible. The one book of the Bible is Hebrews. The one chapter of the Bible is Genesis 15. If I'm only allowed one verse, okay? And you bring it to me, make it, paste up in block letters so that I can hang it on the ceiling or on the wall so that I have it in front of me every waking moment in my cell. If I can only have one verse of the Bible, this is it. Genesis 15:17. Don't look at it. Let me surprise you. Sit back and enjoy it. Feast upon it. This is delicious. And it came about that when the sun had set, that it was very dark. And behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch, which passed between these pieces. Can you believe it? In the midst of terror, in the midst of fear and uncertainty, suddenly in his vision of the night, Abraham sees a smoking oven, a flaming torch rise. And this torch that no human being was carrying moved and came near and came to this corridor of carnage of these animals that had been torn asunder. And in that path between the bodies that were mangled on the ground, this flaming torch, this burning oven, moved down the middle of them. So what? Right? Sproul, have you lost your mind? What's the big deal? Here's the big deal. In the ancient world, when truth was at stake, and when a promise was to be made that was to be absolutely binding, sacrosanct, that promise was made and sealed in the form of a covenant. And in those days, you didn't write a covenant so much as you cut a covenant. Because when the terms of the covenant were made, beloved, and promises were uttered and declared, those promises were not absolutely binding on the persons involved in this agreement until those promises were ratified by a cutting rite. God said to Abraham, Abraham, I will be your God, you will be my people. I will make a covenant with you, and you're going to make the mark of that covenant in your body and in your son's body. I'm going to cut off the foreskin of your flesh so that in your very manhood you will be cut. And the symbol of that cut, the purpose of the knife, will be to remind you that I have cut you off from the rest of this world that is perishing. I have set you apart. I have consecrated you. I have made you holy. And that's the blessing of which I spoke. And the sign of that blessing will be seen in this cutting rite of circumcision. But the sanctions of this covenant, Abraham, are twofold. That sign will also be a sign of the curse to anyone who breaks the terms of this covenant. And the sign of circumcision will mean to you, Abraham, and to your seed forever, that if you ever violate this agreement, that you are saying in your own body, may I be cut off from all of the blessings of God if I fail to obey him. And so every Jew who entered into the covenant with God was forced to go through this liturgy of cutting to ratify the promise. But the point, beloved, is that God did not ask his people to ratify their oath without being willing to do it himself. Now, what happened? How did God swear an oath? Meredith Kline, the Old Testament theologian that's been contributed so much to modern scholarship, once wrote a book called By Oath Consigned, calling attention to the fact that at the heart of our relationship to God is the oath, is the vow, is the promise on both sides of the equation. My promise to God, God's promise to me. Now, how does God swear an oath? How does God make a promise? What does God say? Do we go to God and put a Bible in his hand and say, raise your right hand, God, and say it to me, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me? Huh? We don't do that. How does God take an oath? How does God swear a vow? What we've read here with this strange description of the furnace and the smoke passing through these bloody pieces is a theophany. And a theophany is one of these technical theological terms. You get the Greek word theos for God and phoneo, which means to manifest. The word theophany means a visible manifestation of the invisible God. And when God appears visibly in the Bible, his favorite way of doing it is in some form of fire. The bush that burns but is not consumed. The pillar of smoke that leads the people of Israel through the wilderness. Do you see, in Hebrew terms, what is happening in this night vision is that Abraham sees that flaming torch moving through those pieces. That flaming torch represents the very presence of God. And here God is stooping to human level. God is condescending to swear a sacred, eternal vow to his people. And the meaning of that vow, when God passes between those pieces of the animal, what God is saying to Abraham is, Abraham, do you want to know if I'm going to keep my word? Do you want to know if I'm going to keep my promise to you? Well, let me tell you what I'm going to put on the line. I am swearing by myself. There's nothing higher than myself. I can't swear by the heavens. I made the heavens. I can't swear by the earth. I made the earth. The only thing I can swear by, not the hair of my chinny chin chin, the only thing I can swear by, Abraham, is my eternal character, my immutable being. And what I am dramatizing to you in this action, Abraham, is this. If I ever fail to keep a promise to you, I am saying, may I, the immutable, eternal, self-existent being, suffer a mutation. May I, who am immortal, become mortal. May I, who cannot die, perish. I'm swearing by my deity. And I'm saying that just as you have cut these animals in half, if I ever lie to you, if I ever break a promise to you, may I be cut in half and destroyed. One of the most poignant moments of my ministry was when I was a young teacher at a seminary in Boston and got to know a man in the administration as a dear friend whose name was Deke Ketchum. And Deke got cancer that was terminal, died an inch at a time. And in the last weeks of his life, he was alone in the hospital room in Mass General there in Boston. And I used to go down and visit him at the hospital. I remember I was with him the day he died. And one of the things that bothered me was that there was so little I could do for this man. He was emaciated. He was weak. He could hardly speak. It was a tender thing. I could take the ice from the jar next to his bedside and take little pieces and fragments of ice and put them on his parched lips. And his eyes would speak to me of appreciation. But what Deke wanted more than anything else was for me to read to him from the Scriptures. And on the day he died, here's what I read to him. Turn to the book of Hebrews. And I read this. I said, Deke, here's where the Word of God says, "For God is not unjust to forget your work and the love which you have shown toward His name in having ministered and in still ministering to the saints. And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence so as to realize the full assurance of hope until the end, that you may not be sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promise. For when God made the promise to Abraham, since he could swear by none greater, he swore by himself." And then verse 16, "For men swear by one greater than themselves, and with them an oath given as confirmation is an end of every dispute. In the same way, God, desiring even more to show the heirs of the promise the unchangeableness of the purpose, He interposed it with an oath, in order that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we may have strong encouragement. We who have fled for refuge in laying hold of the hope that is set before us." George Washington could tell a lie. But it's impossible for God to lie. And it is impossible for God to break a promise. For He has taken an oath, and He has sworn by Himself.